I need to tell you something about my grandmother before she dies, because once she's gone, this story dies with her. And honestly, maybe that's what she wants. But I can't let that happen. Last week I found a shoebox in her attic. Inside were 47 red ribbons, each one tied in the exact same way. Each one stained with something that looked like rust, but probably wasn't. Beneath them was a photograph dated August 1935, showing a group of children standing at the edge of a forest. Every single one wore a red ribbon around their left wrist. My grandmother was one of those children. When I brought the box downstairs, her face went white. Not pale. White. Like every drop of blood had just evacuated her body. She grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and said, "Where did you find that? You weren't supposed to find that. I'm 34 years old. I have a master's degree. I don't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that superstitious nonsense." But the way my grandmother looked at that box made something cold settle in my stomach. "Grandma," I said, "what is this?" She looked at me for a long time, then she said, "Sit down, and don't interrupt me, because I'm only going to tell this once." This is what she told me. In the summer of 1935, something was wrong in Granger Hollow. Now, you have to understand what wrong meant in Appalachia back then. Wrong wasn't just bad weather or a failed crop. Wrong was the kind of thing that made grown men refuse to go into the woods. Wrong was when animals started acting strange and children stopped laughing and the old women gathered in kitchens with their doors locked, whispering prayers that didn't come from any Bible. It started in June. A little boy named Thomas Pritchard went missing. Thomas was 6 years old, red-haired, gap-toothed, the kind of kid who was always covered in dirt and grinning about it. He went out to collect firewood one afternoon and never came home. His father organized a search party within an hour. 24 men combed those woods for 3 days straight. They found him on the third day. He was sitting against a tree, perfectly still, eyes open. No injuries, no signs of exposure or animal attack. He was just sitting there, staring at nothing. And he wouldn't speak. Not couldn't, wouldn't. The doctor examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His vocal cords were fine. His hearing was fine. He just sat there in his bed, staring at the wall, not making a sound. But here's the thing that nobody wanted to talk about. Thomas's left wrist had a mark on it, a thin red line, like something had been tied there, tight. His mother swore up and down that he hadn't been wearing anything on his wrist when he left the house. 2 weeks later, it happened again. Sarah Holcomb, age 8, went to fetch water from the creek, didn't come back. Found the next morning in the same condition, sitting, staring, silent. Same red mark on her left wrist. Then it was James Wickham. Then Mary Catherine Oates. Then the Dunbar twins. Within 6 weeks, 11 children had gone missing and been found in that same condition. Sitting, silent, marked. The community was losing its mind. See, this is something people don't understand about isolated mountain communities in the 1930s. We, and I say we because my grandmother always talked about it like she was still there, we didn't have the luxury of rationality. We didn't have psychiatrists or social workers or any of that. We had survival instincts honed over generations, and those instincts were screaming that something was hunting our children. The old women knew what it was before anyone else admitted it. They called it the folded man. Now every Appalachian community has its stories. Most of them are just cautionary tales designed to keep children from wandering into dangerous places. Don't go in the woods at night or the knot deer will get you. Don't whistle after dark or you'll wake the things that sleep in the hills. That kind of thing. But the folded man was different. The folded man was specific. According to the stories, the folded man wasn't from these mountains. He came from somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't have a name in our language. He looked almost human, except his proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, joints that bent in ways they shouldn't. And when he moved wrong. Like his bones were folded up inside his skin and he was constantly unfolding himself to walk. The stories said he collected children, not to kill them, that would be almost merciful. He collected them to make them like him. He'd take them into the spaces between trees, the places where the forest folded in on itself. And he'd teach them to fold too. Most of the men dismissed this as superstitious nonsense. The women didn't argue. They just started gathering. My grandmother was 9 years old that summer. She remembers the meeting clearly. Every woman in Granger Hollow showed up at the church on a Tuesday night. Not for prayer, for something older than prayer. They locked the doors and closed the shutters, and my grandmother's mother told her to sit in the corner and not say a single word. The oldest woman there was Granny Wick. She was 90-something, nobody knew exactly, and she remembered things from before the Civil War. She stood at the front of that church and said, "I seen this before, 1877, over in Kettle Creek. 26 children taken, only got back 13. The room went silent. "We need the old ways," Granny Wick said, "the ways our grandmothers knew, the ways that came with us from Scotland and Wales and the old countries. Because this thing ain't new. It's been taking children from us for hundreds of years." One of the younger women, my grandmother couldn't remember her name, said, "That's devil worship, what you're talking about." Granny Wick laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. "The devil?" she said. "Child, the devil is just a story to keep you scared of yourself. This is older than the devil. This is about keeping our babies alive." She pulled out a cloth bundle and unwrapped it on the pulpit. Inside were dozens of red ribbons, all the same length, all cut from the same fabric. "Red is protection," Granny Wick said. "Red is blood, and blood is family, and family is the strongest magic there is. Every child wears one, every single child. Tied on their left wrist, 3 knots. Pulled tight enough to feel, but not tight enough to hurt. And once it's on, it doesn't come off. Not until this is over." "How do we know when it's over?" someone asked. Granny Wick's expression went hard. "We'll know." The women agreed, even though some of them looked sick about it. What choice did they have? 11 children had been taken. 11 children were sitting in their beds, staring at nothing, not speaking, not eating unless forced. The doctors said it was psychological trauma, shock, some new kind of mental illness. The women knew better. The next morning, every child in Granger Hollow woke up with a red ribbon tied around their left wrist. My grandmother remembers her mother tying it on. 3 knots, exactly like Granny Wick said. Her mother's hands were shaking. "Don't take this off," she said. "Don't let anyone take this off. You hear me? Anyone asks, you tell them your mama tied it, and your mama said it stays." "What's it for?" my grandmother asked. Her mother's eyes were wet. "So you come home." The children went to school wearing the ribbons. The men saw them and asked what foolishness this was. The women wouldn't explain. They just said it was for protection, and the men could accept that or not. But the ribbons were staying on. Most of the men grumbled, but didn't fight it. They'd seen their children's friends sitting catatonic in darkened rooms. They were desperate enough to allow anything. For 3 days, nothing happened. On the 4th day, a child named Michael Sutton went missing. He was 10 years old. He went out to check the rabbit traps in the early morning. His mother had tied a red ribbon on his wrist, the same as everyone else. 3 knots, tight enough to feel. They found him 6 hours later. He was sitting against a tree, same as all the others, staring, silent. But his ribbon was gone. Not cut, not torn. Just gone. And the red mark on his wrist was there, same as all the others who'd been taken. The women gathered again that night. This time they were afraid in a different way. The ribbons were supposed to work. That was the old knowledge, the inherited protection that had been passed down through generations. Granny Wick examined Michael Sutton herself. She looked at his wrist for a long time. Then she said something that made everyone's blood run cold. "It's learning." "What do you mean?" my grandmother's mother asked. "The folded man," Granny Wick said. "It's learning. It figured out the ribbons. It knows to take them off now." This is the part of the story where I need to pause and address something. Because I know what you're thinking. You're thinking this is a folk tale, a cautionary story. Maybe mass hysteria combined with some kind of environmental toxin or undiagnosed neurological condition. I thought that too. I thought my grandmother was remembering childhood fears exaggerated by time and trauma. Then she showed me the newspaper clippings. The Granger Hollow Gazette, August 1935, "Mystery illness affects local children." The article describes exactly what my grandmother told me. 12 children found unresponsive after disappearing in the woods. all showing the same symptoms. Doctors baffled. There was a photograph. 12 children in hospital beds, eyes open, staring at nothing. This happened. This was real. Now, whether you believe the explanation is something else entirely, but something took those children, something marked them, and the community's response to that crisis tells us a lot about human psychology, about how we deal with threats we don't understand. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the story. After Michael Sutton was found, the women made new ribbons. These ones were different. Granny Wick spent an entire day preparing them. My grandmother watched part of it. She saw Granny Wick take new ribbons, same red fabric, and soak them in a mixture that included water from a spring that had never seen sunlight, salt, and something else that my grandmother wasn't allowed to see. While the ribbons soaked, Granny Wick sang. Not hymns, songs in a language my grandmother didn't recognize. Old songs, songs that made the hair stand up on her arms. "These ribbons won't come off easy," Granny Wick said when she was done. "Whatever tries to take them off will regret it." The women tied the new ribbons on their children that night. Same method, 3 knots on the left wrist. But this time Granny Wick had additional instructions. "The children need to go into the woods," she said. The room erupted. Absolutely not. No way in hell were they sending their children into the woods where this thing was taking them. Granny Wick held up her hand. "Listen to me. We can't fight this by hiding. It'll just pick us off one by one. We need to confront it. We need to show it that we're not prey." "You want to use our children as bait?" someone shouted. "I want to protect our children," Granny Wick said, "and the only way to do that is to make it afraid of us, instead of us being afraid of it." The argument went on for hours. Some women refused outright. Others were desperate enough to try anything. In the end, 23 children went into the woods the next morning. My grandmother was one of them. She was 9 years old, wearing a red ribbon soaked in God knows what, walking into a forest where 12 of her peers had been taken by something that nobody could explain. She told me she'd never been so scared in her entire life. Not during World War II when her husband was overseas. Not when she had cancer in 1998. Nothing ever compared to that morning. The children walked in a group. That was one of Granny Wick's rules. Stay together, stay within sight of each other, and every child had a whistle on a cord around their neck. If anything happened, blow the whistle and run toward the sound of others. The mothers waited at the edge of the forest, armed. My great-grandmother had a shotgun. Mrs. Pritchard had a hunting rifle. Several others had kitchen knives, axes, whatever they could find. The children walked for 2 hours. The woods were quiet, too quiet. My grandmother said it was like the forest was holding its breath. No birds, no squirrels. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. Then Tommy Chen saw it. He was 12, the oldest of the group. He'd been walking point, and he suddenly stopped so fast that the girl behind him ran into him. "What is it?" she whispered. Tommy pointed. Standing between 2 trees, about 50 yards away, was a man. Except he wasn't a man. He was too tall, his limbs were too long. And when he moved, just a slight shift of weight, his body seemed to fold in the middle, like he had extra joints that allowed him to bend in impossible ways. The folded man. Every child froze. They'd been told what to do if they saw it, blow the whistles and run. But fear paralyzed them. The thing tilted its head. It was studying them. Then it smiled. My grandmother said that smile was the worst part. It was too wide, too many teeth. It wasn't a human expression trying to look friendly. It was something else trying to mimic humanity and getting it horribly wrong. It took a step toward them. That broke the paralysis. Tommy blew his whistle. The sound was piercing in the silent forest. Every other child immediately followed suit, 23 whistles shrieking at once. The thing flinched. It actually recoiled from the sound, folding backward in that disturbing way it moved. And then the children saw its wrist. It wore something that looked like a red ribbon. But this ribbon was made of skin. Human skin. 12 pieces tied together, wrapped around its too long wrist. The taken children's ribbons. It wore them like a trophy. Tommy Chen was the first to run. The others followed immediately. They crashed through the underbrush, whistles still blowing, the sound of their mothers screaming their names getting closer. My grandmother glanced back once. The folded man wasn't following them. It was just standing there, that horrible smile still on its face, slowly unwrapping the skin ribbon from its wrist. The children burst out of the forest into their mother's arms. Everyone was crying, screaming, trying to explain what they'd seen. But here's the thing. When they counted heads, they were all there. All 23 children had come back. Whatever Granny Wick had done to those ribbons, it had worked. The folded man had been there. It had seen them. But it hadn't taken anyone. That should have been the end of it. Should have been. But Granny Wick wasn't satisfied. It's still there, she said, and as long as it's there, it's a threat. We saw it flinch from the whistles. We saw it recoil. That means it can be hurt. That means it can be killed. You can't kill something like that, my grandmother's mother said. Can't we? Granny Wick's eyes were hard. Our grandmothers did. Back in the old country, they dealt with things like this. They had methods. What methods? Granny Wick smiled. It was an expression that made her look 50 years younger and infinitely more dangerous. Fire, she said, iron and blood given freely. This is where the story gets dark. I mean, it's already dark. We're talking about something that was abducting and mentally destroying children. But what came next shows you what people are capable of when they're protecting their families. The women made a plan. They would go into the woods at night, the women, not the children. They would find the folded man, and they would end it. Granny Wick said it had a den, a place where it folded the space around itself to hide. But when it was hunting, when it was active, that space became vulnerable. The fabric of it could be torn. And if you tore it while the thing was inside, it would trap it. How do we tear it? Someone asked. Iron, Granny Wick said. Cold iron, forged by hand, blessed by intention. And it has to be driven in by someone who's lost something to it. Mrs. Pritchard stepped forward immediately. Her son Thomas was still sitting in his bed, staring at nothing. I'll do it. 11 other women stepped forward, every mother whose child had been taken. What happened next took 3 days to prepare. The men weren't involved. This was women's work, old work. They gathered iron from wherever they could find it. Old nails, horseshoes, pieces of farming equipment. A blacksmith 3 towns over, a woman, which was rare then, forged it all into 12 iron stakes. While she worked the forge, the women who would carry the stakes fasted. 3 days without food, only water from that sunless spring. They painted symbols on their skin with a mixture of ash and blood, their own blood given freely because that was the requirement. My grandmother watched this preparation with 9-year-old eyes. She told me it was like watching her mother and the other women transform into something else. Something ancient and fierce and absolutely terrifying. On the 3rd night, they went into the woods. 12 women, 12 iron stakes, and Granny Wick leading them. The children, including my grandmother, were locked in the church with the few women who stayed behind to watch them. My grandmother remembers pressing her face against the window, watching the lantern lights disappear into the trees. What happened in the woods that night is something my grandmother only knows secondhand. Her mother never talked about it in detail. None of the women did, but this is what the children pieced together from whispers and nightmares. The women walked for hours, following Granny Wick deeper into the forest than any of them had ever gone. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, like she could sense the folded space. They found it in a clearing that shouldn't have existed. The trees around it were wrong. They grew in spirals, their trunks twisted around each other, their branches forming impossible angles. And in the center of the clearing was a gap in the air itself. Not a cave or a hole in the ground, a gap in reality. Like someone had taken scissors to the fabric of the world and cut an opening. The folded man was there. It was standing in the gap, and it was surrounded by children. Not the 12 taken children from Granger Hollow. Dozens of children, maybe hundreds. They were all sitting on the ground in concentric circles, all staring at the folded man, all absolutely silent. Some of them wore clothes from decades ago. Some of them looked like they'd been there for years, and all of them had that red mark on their left wrist. Mrs. Pritchard saw her son in the second circle. She screamed his name. Thomas didn't react. None of the children did. The folded man turned its attention to the women. That terrible smile spread across its face, and then it spoke. My grandmother's mother never told her exactly what it said. She just said, "It offered us a trade." The thing claimed that the children weren't being hurt. They were being saved, kept safe in the folded space where nothing could harm them, where they would never grow old or sick or suffer. All it wanted was to protect them. All it asked in return was to be left alone to continue its work. Granny Wick's response was immediate and violent. She threw the first iron stake. I don't know if you've ever seen someone who's spent their entire life working with their hands throw something, but they don't miss. Granny Wick's stake flew straight and true and buried itself in the ground, right at the edge of that gap in reality. The folded man shrieked. The sound wasn't like anything natural. My grandmother heard it from the church over a mile away. Every child in that building clapped their hands over their ears and started crying. The other 11 women threw their stakes in rapid succession, forming a circle around the gap. As each stake hit the ground, the air shimmered. The gap started to close. The folded man tried to reach for the stakes, to pull them out, but the moment its fingers touched the cold iron, its flesh burned. Smoke rose from its hands. It retreated into the gap, folding itself smaller and smaller, trying to escape into the space it had created. But the iron was doing its work. The folded space was collapsing. The last thing the women saw before the gap closed completely was the folded man's face, that horrible smile finally gone, replaced by something that might have been fear. The gap sealed shut with a sound like thunder, and then the children moved. All of them, hundreds of children sitting in that impossible clearing, all turning their heads at once to look at the women. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then the children stood up. Slowly, like they were remembering how their bodies worked. Some of them swayed, some of them fell and had to catch themselves, but they were moving, they were responding. The 12 children from Granger Hollow walked toward their mothers like sleepwalkers. When Mrs. Pritchard grabbed Thomas and held him, he blinked, slowly, like he was waking up from a very long dream. "Mama?" he whispered. It was the first word any of the taken children had spoken in weeks, but here's the thing that nobody expected. The other children were still there, the ones who'd been taken years ago, decades ago. They were waking up too, and they were terrified. Imagine being a child, walking into the woods one day in 1890, and then suddenly waking up in 1935. Everyone you knew is dead or ancient. The world has completely changed. You're still 8 years old, but you've been gone for 45 years. The women did their best. They gathered all the children they could find in that clearing, 73 in total, and led them out of the woods. The sun was rising when they emerged from the forest. My grandmother said she'll never forget the sight. 12 women, covered in ash and blood, leading dozens of children out of the trees. Some of those children were wearing clothes that were practically rotting off their bodies. Some were barefoot. All of them looked confused and scared. The logistics of what happened next were a nightmare. How do you explain to a child from 1890 that they've been missing for 45 years? How do you track down descendants of families that might have moved away or died out? The authorities were called, of course, state police, social workers, everyone. The official story was that the children had been held by a hermit living deep in the woods, and that hermit had died, releasing them. Some kind of psychological control. Nobody believed that story, but it was the only one that made any kind of sense. Most of the children from other times were eventually placed with distant relatives or foster families. A few were never identified at all. The psychological trauma was immense. Several of them never really recovered, but the 12 children from Granger Hollow did recover. Slowly, Thomas Pritchard started speaking again after a week. Sarah Holcomb after 2 weeks. Within a month, all 12 were back to being relatively normal children, except they all had nightmares. Every single one of them, for the rest of their lives, would occasionally wake up screaming about the man who folded wrong, and they all kept their red ribbons. Granny Wick had told their mothers to let them keep the ribbons until they fell off naturally. They earned those, she said. They survived something that should have destroyed them. Let them keep the proof. My grandmother wore hers for 7 years. It finally fell apart in 1942, the threads disintegrating from age and wear. She saved it. She saved it for over 80 years, along with the ribbons from the other children as they fell apart and were given to her for safekeeping. That's what was in the shoebox. 47 ribbons. 12 from the children of Granger Hollow. 35 from the children who'd been taken before. The other ribbons were never recovered. They'd been part of that skin ribbon the folded man wore. When the gap closed, they were destroyed along with it. Now, here's what I need you to understand about this story. It's not just a scary tale, it's a historical record of how a community responded to a crisis they couldn't explain with the tools and knowledge they had available. Could there be a rational explanation? Sure, mass hysteria, environmental toxins, a human predator who used psychological manipulation. The human mind is capable of creating elaborate frameworks to explain trauma. But the newspaper clippings are real. The photographs are real. 73 children emerged from those woods in August 1935. That's documented fact. What took them? That's where belief comes in. My grandmother believes it was the folded man. She saw it with her own eyes. She heard it shriek when the iron touched the folded space. She watched her friends wake up from catatonia when that gap was sealed. I believe my grandmother is telling me the truth as she experienced it. Whether that truth is objective reality or a shared delusion created by trauma and fear. Does that actually matter? Those women went into the woods to save their children. They used whatever methods they had available, rational or not. And they succeeded. That's what matters. This story exists in the space between folklore and history. It's both and neither. It's a record of human courage and desperation. It's a window into how isolated communities dealt with threats in an era before modern psychology and law enforcement. And it's a reminder that there are still things in this world we don't understand. After my grandmother finished telling me this story, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I know you probably think I'm a crazy old woman. That's fine. But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If you ever have children, and if something starts taking children in your area, you tie a red ribbon around their left wrist. 3 knots. Tight enough to feel, and you don't let anyone tell you it's superstitious nonsense." I promised. What else could I do? She died 6 weeks later, peacefully, in her sleep. At her funeral, I noticed something. 12 other elderly people attended. I didn't know who they were until one of them introduced herself. "I'm Sarah," she said, "Sarah Holcomb." Well, Sarah Mitchell now. I was one of the children. All 12 of them had come, all 12 survivors of the Granger Hollow incident. They were in their 90s now, the last living witnesses to whatever happened in those woods. They all wore red ribbons around their left wrists. New ribbons, obviously, but tied the same way, 3 knots. "We wear them on the anniversary," Sarah told me, "every August, just in case." "Just in case what?" She looked at me with eyes that had seen something no child should ever see. "Just in case it comes back." I asked her about the folded man then. I asked if she remembered what happened to her during those weeks she was gone. She shook her head. "I remember walking into the woods. I remember sitting down. And then I remember waking up with my mother holding me. Everything between is just folded." Folded. That word choice sent chills down my spine. "Do you think it's really gone?" I asked. Sarah looked toward the mountains visible in the distance. "I think the women of Granger Hollow were smart and brave and did what they had to do," she said. "I think they used knowledge passed down through generations to fight something that had been preying on children for centuries. I think they won. But I also think that when you fold something, you can always unfold it. I'm telling you this story because I think it's important. Not just as a historical curiosity or a scary campfire tale, but as a lesson. The women of Granger Hollow faced something terrifying. They didn't have experts to call. They didn't have government agencies or scientific resources. All they had was their community, their courage, and their inherited knowledge. And they used all 3. They didn't ignore the problem or hope it would go away. They didn't wait for someone else to fix it. They gathered their resources, material and spiritual, and they acted. Was their solution rational by modern standards? No. Did it work? According to every account, yes. That's the power of community action. That's what people can accomplish when they refuse to be victims. Now, I'm not suggesting we should all start tying red ribbons on our children or performing folk rituals in the woods. Modern problems require modern solutions. But the principles remain the same: community, courage, action. When something threatens our children, whether it's a literal predator, a social ill, or a systemic problem, we have a choice. We can hide and hope it doesn't touch us. Or we can gather together, use every tool and resource we have available, and fight back. The women of Granger Hollow chose to fight. 73 children came home because of that choice. I kept the shoebox of ribbons. I keep it in my closet, and sometimes I take it out and look at the photograph of those children standing at the edge of the forest. My grandmother is third from the left, 9 years old, serious expression, red ribbon visible on her left wrist. She looks brave. They all do. Last year I had a daughter. When she was born, my wife asked if there were any family traditions we should observe. I almost told her about the red ribbon. Almost. But then I thought about how insane it would sound, how I'd have to explain the whole story, how she'd probably think I'd lost my mind. So I didn't tell her. But I did tie a red ribbon around my daughter's wrist when we brought her home from the hospital. Very loosely, I'm not a monster, just loose enough that she could feel it. 3 knots. My wife asked what it was for. Protection, I said. She smiled and kissed my forehead. That's sweet. The ribbon fell off after a week. I saved it. I don't know if I believe in the folded man. I don't know if I believe that red ribbons have protective power. But I know that my grandmother survived something traumatic. I know that she carried that experience for 94 years. I know that she wanted me to carry it too. So I am. I'm carrying this story. I'm sharing it with you. And I'm asking you to think about what it means. What does it mean that an entire community believed in something enough to act on it? What does it mean that their action, rational or not, achieved results? What does it mean that the survivors carried that belief for their entire lives? History is full of stories like this, folk practices that seem absurd to modern minds, but that served important psychological and social functions. Rituals that created community cohesion. Beliefs that gave people the courage to face the unknown. The red ribbons of Granger Hollow were all of that. They were protection, maybe not literal magical protection, but the protection that comes from community solidarity. They were identity markers, visible proof that these children were valued and guarded. They were weapons, psychological tools that gave the women courage to march into those woods and confront whatever was taking their children. Did they actually repel a supernatural entity? I can't prove that. Did they save 73 children? Yes. Documented historical fact. That's enough for me. There's one more thing I need to tell you. Last month, I was looking through local news from my grandmother's area, just curious, seeing what had changed in the 90 years since her childhood. I found an article from 3 weeks ago. A child had gone missing in the woods near Granger Hollow. 5 years old, went to play in the backyard, wandered into the trees. Found 12 hours later, sitting against an oak tree, unresponsive. Doctors couldn't find anything wrong. The child just sat there, staring. There was a photograph with the article. The child's left wrist had a thin red mark like something had been tied there. I stared at that article for an hour. Then I did something crazy. I drove to Granger Hollow. 8 hours, straight through. I had to see. The town is smaller now. Most of the young people have moved away. But there are still families there, still children. I found the church where the women had gathered in 1935. It's been converted into a community center now, but the building is the same. I went inside and asked if anyone knew about the recent missing child case. The woman at the desk, maybe 60 years old, looked at me suspiciously. "Why are you asking?" "My grandmother was from here," I said. "She told me a story about something similar that happened in 1935. The woman's expression changed. "What was your grandmother's name?" I told her. The woman's eyes widened. "Wait here." She came back 5 minutes later with 3 other women, all of them elderly, all of them looking at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Your grandmother," one of them said. "She was one of the ribbon children." "Yes." They looked at each other. Some kind of silent communication passed between them. "Come with us," they said. They took me to a house on the edge of town. Inside, a young mother sat on a couch, holding a 5-year-old girl. The child was staring at the wall, not responding to anything. The thin red mark was visible on her left wrist. "We tried the ribbons," the mother said. Her voice was hollow. We heard the old stories, some of us still remember. We tied ribbons on all the children, but it didn't work. She was still taken. One of the elderly women, I later learned her name was Martha, and her grandmother had been one of the women who went into the woods in 1935, said the ribbons were just part of it. It was what was in the ribbons that mattered. The preparation, the intention. Do you know how to prepare them? I asked. Martha shook her head. Granny Wick took that knowledge to her grave. She died in 1948. None of us thought we'd need it again. I looked at the little girl on the couch, staring, silent, just like my grandmother had described. And I realized something. The story isn't over. Whatever the folded man was, supernatural entity, human predator using psychological techniques, mass delusion, environmental factor, it's back, or it never left, or it's cyclical, appearing every 90 years or so. The pattern is the same, the symptoms are identical, the red mark on the wrist, and we don't know how to fight it anymore. The knowledge was lost. I asked Martha and the other women what they were going to do. We're gathering, Martha said, tonight, every woman in Granger Hollow who remembers the old stories. We're going to try to piece together what we can. What if you can't remember enough? Then we improvise, she said grimly. Our grandmothers didn't have a perfect instruction manual either. They did what they thought would work, and it did. I stayed for the gathering. 23 women showed up at the church that night. 23, the same number of children who went into the woods in 1935. I don't know if that's coincidence or something else. They pooled their memories, fragments from grandmothers, from old journals, from whispered stories. They reconstructed what they could of the ritual. Red ribbon, water from a sunless spring, salt, blood given freely, iron stakes, and something else, something they couldn't quite remember, some final ingredient or invocation. They made the ribbons anyway, did their best with what they had. The next morning, they tied those ribbons on every child in Granger Hollow. 27 children total, and they waited. I had to leave, my own family needed me, but I made them promise to call me with updates. That was 2 weeks ago. This morning, I got a call from Martha. 3 more children have been found sitting in the woods, staring, silent. Red marks on their wrists. The ribbons didn't work. We need help, Martha said. We need someone who knows more than we do. Someone who's studied this kind of thing. I don't know who that would be, I said. Neither do I, Martha said. But we're running out of time. And we're running out of children. So I'm putting this story out there, all of it. Every detail my grandmother told me, every scrap of information I've gathered. Because maybe someone reading this knows something. Maybe someone has heard similar stories from their own family. Maybe someone has encountered this pattern before. Or maybe, and this is what I really hope, maybe someone reading this is a researcher or a psychologist or a folklorist who can provide a framework for understanding what's happening. Because here's what I know for certain. Children are being harmed. Whatever the mechanism, supernatural, psychological, environmental, children are disappearing into the woods and coming back broken. And a community is desperately trying to protect them using incomplete knowledge from 90 years ago. They need help. If you know anything, if you've heard similar stories, if you have expertise in folklore or psychology or environmental science or anything that might be relevant, please reach out. I'm not asking you to believe in the folded man. I'm not asking you to accept that red ribbons have magical properties. I'm asking you to help protect children. That's what the women of Granger Hollow did in 1935. They set aside their egos and their skepticism and their fear, and they did what needed to be done. We need to do the same. My grandmother used to say that the scariest stories are the ones that don't end. The ones that keep going, that spill over from the past into the present, that refuse to stay safely contained in history books. This story doesn't end. It's still happening. Right now, in a small town in Appalachia, children are sitting in darkened rooms, staring at nothing, marked by something that nobody fully understands. Right now, women are gathering in churches and kitchens, trying to remember old knowledge, trying to piece together protection rituals from fragments and faith. Right now, parents are lying awake at night, listening for the sound of their children's breathing, terrified of the silence. This is not folklore. This is not ancient history, this is happening now. And the only way to stop it is the same way the women of Granger Hollow stopped it in 1935. Community, courage, action, gather your knowledge, share what you know, protect the vulnerable, tie the red ribbons if you want. I can't promise they'll help, but they certainly can't hurt. And if you see something in the woods that folds wrong, that moves in ways that human bodies shouldn't move, that wears a smile with too many teeth, tell someone, tell everyone. Don't let it take our children. Don't let this story continue. End it. We ended it before. We can end it again, but we have to do it together. That's what my grandmother would have wanted. That's what all those brave women from 1935 would have wanted. They fought for their children with everything they had. We have to do the same. The red ribbons are waiting. The question is, are we brave enough to tie them on?